I'd just like to call up our next speakers, Lucy Devonshire and Hannah Davidson, and they're going to talk to us on factors affecting the balancing of gender representation in the engineering profession. As part of their final year Bachelor for Engineering Honours at the University of Auckland, Lucy and Hannah undertook a project on factors affecting the balancing of gender representation in the New Zealand engineering industry. Their supervisors were Dr. Max Stevens and Dr. Charlotte Toma, both who are lecturers at the University of Auckland. Lucy and Hannah will share the key factors they identified which affect gender imbalance in the engineering workforce, emphasising both barriers to the career progression and initiatives that encourage diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I'd like you all to welcome Lucy and Hannah. Thanks.
Gender imbalance in the engineering industry has been well documented worldwide. Women continue to be underrepresented, as I'm sure you've noticed over your time working in engineering. I'm Hannah and this is Lucy, and we're both practicing structural engineers. We're here to present our research on factors affecting gender representation in the engineering industry, which was supervised by Max Stevens and Charlotte Toma at University of Auckland. Women are underrepresented in the engineering industry, I'm sure you all know. Currently, the proportion of women in engineering education is rising, with 27% of University of Auckland undergraduate students being women at the moment. Although women are modestly gaining representation in university, this is not reflected in the industry. Here's a graph reproduced from the Engineering New Zealand Remuneration Survey from last year, showing 30% of graduates are women. However, this reduces as careers progress and engineers move into leadership positions. This is in line with international research, which emphasizes the leaky pipeline present in this industry. Our research focuses on the factors that affect women's career progression in engineering and how this compares to men. We wanted to determine how many engineers are leaving the engineering industry and if this varies by gender. We also wanted to determine barriers within the industry for women and potential initiatives that could be implemented for improving gender representation. Our research was focused on engineers in the first 10 years of their career and was broken into 3 parts to get an overall view on their experiences and to understand how different factors have affected them. We wanted to understand variation across gender of occupations, industries, and the number of roles held by engineers to assess attrition rates. To do this, we used a list of University of Auckland graduates from 2011 to 2017 to collect employment data from LinkedIn profiles. We recorded information from 300 men and 294 women to gain an insight into what people are doing now and whether they've stayed in engineering. We were interested in comparing how the factors identified in past research affect those currently working in the engineering industry in New Zealand and whether there are other factors impacting those working here. To find this out, we sent out a questionnaire to more than 1,300 men and women who graduated within the same time period to understand their experiences in the engineering industry. We had an overall response rate of almost 20%. We used these responses to compare the impacts of various factors on men and women, and to assist in interpreting the data collected through the questionnaire and understand how these factors present themselves in industry, we also conducted 6 focus groups at various companies across New Zealand. Through these, we gained an in-depth insight into how women feel in the engineering workplace. At the University of Auckland from 2011 to 2017, more than 20% of graduates were women consistently throughout this period, with this proportion being up to 28% in some years. This shows the steady flow of women into the industry throughout the last almost 10 years. From the graduate data, we found 18% of women left engineering within the first 10 years of their graduation, compared to 11% of men. This is also reflected in the Engineering New Zealand data I showed previously, with the decline in women as the career levels progress. We've separated our research into 2 components. classified as ingrained societal biases, which are challenges caused by historic bias influencing workplace experience, and company culture, factors which can be controlled more easily through administrative measures. Questionnaire participants were asked how frequently they experienced these challenges, selecting options ranging from always to never, as indicated on this graph. Comments provided through both the questionnaire and focus groups have been used to interpret the qualitative data shown in the graphs. These will be across the bottom of the following slides. Starting with ingrained societal biases and the challenge of gendered stereotypes. We can see here that 92% of women are experiencing gender stereotypes sometimes or more frequently, compared to 56% of men. 46% of women were experiencing gendered stereotypes half the time or more. We found many women didn't recognize discrimination or negative barriers, and they felt pressure to cope with it, seeing it as inevitable. As they see it as inevitable, they didn't classify it as a barrier and just said that it was something they had to deal with that other people didn't, and something that it wasn't worth getting upset about. A participant mentioned that it was almost a normalized thing to see contractors put up posters of naked females. Some women mentioned feeling like other women are also likely to put them down within engineering. In the questionnaire comments and focus groups, this was brought up multiple times, with women displaying bias against other women and themselves, as well as more senior women showing negative behaviour, such as putting other women down. Throughout the questionnaire comments and focus groups, we noticed that women often feel the need to change their personality and portray more confidence to work in the engineering industry, as reflected in this quote. Some comments mentioned their lack of self-confidence as the biggest obstacle, and for some people this had made them want to give up engineering. It was mentioned a few times that being mentored could also help women gain confidence. Next, we'll look at workplace harassment. We can see that more women than men are experiencing workplace harassment, with 44% of men experiencing harassment compared to 53% of women, both of which are quite high proportions. In one focus group, we asked a woman if she had experienced any gender-related barriers, to which she said no, before proceeding to explain, after 20 minutes of discussion, how she had to change teams due to sexual harassment, even explicitly saying this had slowed down her career progression. One woman mentioned that having senior women around to help manage instances of workplace harassment can help enable younger women to more easily deal with these in the workplace. Human resources was brought up a number of times in our focus groups, as participants were often hesitant to take complaints to HR for fear that they might be blown out of proportion, not dealt with in the way that they would like, or it becoming a demanding and lengthy process. One woman mentioned being sexually harassed twice at her company. After the second time, she went to HR, but didn't feel supported by those she approached, which caused her to drop the complaints as it became too time-consuming and stressful for her. Another woman mentioned not wanting others to become aware of a situation, as it might affect how other people perceive her within the company. From overseas research, we found that women often said that they would confront sexism, but in reality they rarely do, because they're worried about becoming characterized as difficult or bossy to work with. So in our focus groups, we also found the same thing, with some women mentioning their reluctance to deal with inappropriate comments as they were uncertain as to how their colleagues might perceive them. They mentioned that potentially having some kind of interpersonal skills training could help everyone deal with confrontation better. Another challenge we looked at was career discontent. This is driven by a range of factors that include both company culture and ingrained societal biases. Respondents cited very high levels of career discontent, with 84% of all engineers within the early stages of their career expressing some level of dissatisfaction. This is a concerningly high statistic, the causes of which we think should be investigated further. Women are also experiencing career discontent at a significantly higher rate than men, with 43% of women reporting career discontent half the time or more frequently, compared to 27% of men who say the same thing. Within the focus groups, we also found participants citing their colleagues as leaving the engineering industry due to career discontent, as evidenced by this quote, yeah. Now I'll pass over to Lucy, and she's going to discuss the company culture factors.
Hello, everyone. So next we're moving on to company culture. Here we've defined company culture factors as those that have been affected by administrative measures or company policy. We asked participants in the survey, how has access to these factors impacted your career progression? I must note that there's a lot of, I haven't changed the graph. Woo, there we go. I must note that there's a lot of data on this graph. I'll explain them further in later slides, but this is to get an overview of the factors and their trends. We selected the following factors based on prior international research, which highlighted these factors as those that impact the retention of women in STEM. The key data that stands out on this graph is the high positive impact of technical skill development for all participants, the higher proportion for women, the higher proportion of women being impacted by leadership opportunities both positively and negatively compared to men, the significantly greater negative impact for role models for women compared to men, and the significantly greater negative impact of pay transparency for women. Next, we asked participants, how satisfied are you with the level of accessibility of these factors in your professional engineering career? Here you can see there's a lot more dissatisfaction with these factors compared to their negative impact on the previous slide. The reason for this is because people may feel positively impacted by a factor, but still feel dissatisfied in their availability within the industry. Some more notable points on this graph is a higher proportion of women who have been extremely dissatisfied with mentors. We can also see that professional development opportunities has a higher satisfaction compared to all the other factors, but this is also the only factor where men are more dissatisfied with the accessibility of compared to women. There's a large proportion of women relative to men that reported being dissatisfied with the accessibility to leadership opportunities, role models, and pay transparency. Now I'll dive a little bit deeper into the data for the key factors, starting with role models. So on the top of the graph, you can see the impacts, and on the bottom, the accessibility. Over 40% of all participants have reported being positively impacted by role models. 26% of women in engineering reported being dissatisfied with the accessibility to role models compared to 11% of men. Some men acknowledge the potential benefit for role models for diversity in gender and in ethnicity. Some women mention how important it is to have role models that they can aspire to be like. Seeing women in leadership positions gives women encouragement and confidence that they too can break that glass ceiling and become a leader at their company in the future. Mentoring has positively impacted approximately 60% of all participants in the engineering industry. For about a third of the participants, they have been strongly impacted by mentors, which is really good to see. Similar proportions of men and women are dissatisfied with the accessibility to mentors, which is around 18%, with 9% of women being extremely dissatisfied with its accessibility. Multiple women within the focus groups cited that mentors have such a big influence on their career that they've stayed in engineering at times where they've considered leaving. It's helped engineers with their confidence in their ability. It was also mentioned that both formal and informal mentoring programs have been impactful as they provided women with valuable insights into their career and also the tools to navigate their career. More women have identified leadership opportunities as a factor that's impacted their career progression compared to men. On average, around a third of all participants are satisfied with the accessibility to leadership opportunities. However, leadership opportunities was mentioned by both men and women in the survey comments. One woman mentioned that support for women should be given due to the gender inequality within leadership in engineering. Both men and women have been aided by technical skill development opportunities, with over 60% of participants being positively impacted by it. The survey results show that over 40% of participants are satisfied with the availability of this factor. However, there's also approximately 18% of participants who are dissatisfied with its availability. Within the focus groups and survey comments, there was mixed emotions from participants. Some participants said that the resources were endless, while others said that they wanted more opportunities. It's also important to note that on this graph, there's similar proportions for men and women with their impact and satisfaction with the accessibility of this factor. Similarly to technical skill development, professional skill development opportunities has had a significant positive impact on the engineers' careers. 56% of women have been positively impacted, and 62% of men have been positively impacted by professional skills development. On average, 44% are satisfied with the accessibility of professional skill development. We can also see similar proportions in the men and women's responses. Within the focus groups, when we asked participants what resources or initiatives could help improve the career progression, it was mentioned that diversity training could help improve awareness around unconscious bias, and also that interpersonal skills training could help manage conflict and confrontation, and that was brought up as beneficial in both New Zealand and overseas. Both men and women found a lack of transparency around career and pay transparency, which has negatively impacted their careers. In the survey, we only asked participants about pay transparency, not career transparency, so this graph is only in relevance to the pay. 15% of women reported feeling negatively impacted by pay transparency, compared to 7% of men. And 21% of women also reported their dissatisfaction with the accessibility of pay transparency, which is 12% higher than men. Although pay transparency was mainly shown by women on this graph, within the survey comments, it was frequently mentioned by men that they wanted pay transparency within their company. Women also mentioned in the qualitative data that pay inequity is of concern, and they aren't surprised if men get paid more than they do. The phrasing of the question, pay transparency, may have influenced responses, as participants may not feel that the lack of transparency itself has impacted their career progression. The Engineering New Zealand Remuneration Survey 2020 shows the persisting pay gap of about 20%, with women on the lower end. If this question was posed in regards to the pay gap, it's possible that the responses would have been different. Many women and men also cited a lack of transparency around career structure and job promotions as a factor that influences their career. One woman mentioned that a benchmark is missing, and that is performance transparency. Many women in the focus groups also cited their managers as having a huge influence on their career progression, both positively and negatively. This factor was also not part of the survey, but was mentioned numerous times in the qualitative data. When managers treated women as part of the team and just one of the engineers, it helped them feel comfortable and less out of place in their role. Within the focus group, situations arose where managers did not yet know how to manage women in their teams with women cited being treated differently. One focus group in particular mentioned administrative-based tasks being allocated to female team members when men were more likely to have practical workshop-based tasks. Among technical and professional skill development opportunities, these factors do not yet appear to be disproportionately affecting women in engineering. All other factors showed contrast between men and women and could be used to address gender imbalance in the engineering industry. With that, we would like to conclude this presentation with some thoughts from our participants. If you're not strong, then I don't know how you're going to survive. The dominant culture in the engineering sector is overwhelmingly hostile to women. This is what needs to change. In our lifetime, I don't think we'll get to the point where it's completely without bias. And until then, we do need the skills that can help all of us. Thank you.